give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His mercy endures forever. Welcome one, welcome all to another episode of Faith Matters with Phillip Campbell. This is a Catholic variety program broadcasting on Good Shepherd Catholic Radio here in lovely Jackson, Michigan. And I, of course, am Phillip Campbell. I am going to be your host for the next half hour as we talk about and learn about all things Catholic. If you ever made your if you think back to when you made your first communion, you had to know certain basic truths about the Catholic faith. You had to be able to explain what the Eucharist was. You had to say the Lord's Prayer. You probably had to say the Hail Mary, and you had to memorize the Ten Commandments. How well do you remember the Ten Commandments today? If I were to just stop you randomly and say, "Hey, Joe, what's the seventh commandment?" Would you be able to say that off the top of your head? Hopefully you would. But the Ten Commandments are something that we often learn when we are little and or preparing First Communion, and then we kind of move on in our lives and in our education, and they're always there in the back of our head. We know the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. We probably know honor thy mother and thy father, thou shalt not kill. But oftentimes we never revisit the commandments as adults and really delve into them, really look at what the commandments say and kind of extrapolate what sort of implications they have for our daily lives. And this is one of the great things if you've ever been involved in RCIA at a parish, helping either sponsoring a person coming into the church or preparing to come into the church yourself. You get an adult level breakdown of the commandments, which many Catholics never get. So, and it's always very fascinating. Series of conversations as you start teasing out, thou shalt not kill. Well, what about war? What about capital punishment? What about self-defense? And you start really getting to dig into the meat and potatoes of the church's moral teaching on these various issues. And so that's what I want to do tonight with one of the commandments that I think probably you will agree in our modern world we really need to reconnect with, and that is the eighth commandment, which is thou shalt not bear false witness. Thou shalt not bear false witness, or it's often paraphrased as thou shalt not lie. That is, we should always be truthful in all our communication, and we should never deliberately tell a falsehood. And this is so important because especially today in the contemporary situation, there is so much falsehood going around. There's this ongoing problem with fake news, with people being unable to trust what the media is telling them, with people on social media sharing false stories, rumors, urban legends being passed off as truth. It's a strange paradox. We have more information at our fingertips than we've ever had before, but it's getting increasingly difficult for the average person to discern the truth out there. So I think as Catholics, it behooves us to recommit ourselves to a dedication to truthfulness in all of our communication, and that's what we're going to spend the next half hour digging into, is the commandment that enjoins truthfulness and just what that means. So the commandment itself, taken from Exodus chapter 20, says, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. And we know, of course, from the parable of the Good Samaritan that basically God views everyone as our neighbor. So when it says you shalt not bear false witness against your neighbor, that means, hey, tell the truth to people. Be truthful. And so what the commandment forbids then specifically is misrepresenting the truth in our relationships with other people. And why can't we misrepresent the truth? What's the big deal if I tell a lie? Well, aside from all the practical considerations with how annoying it is when people lie to you and how hurtful it can be, just from the fact that we are Christians, we claim to represent a holy God who is truth itself, who is the truth and wills the truth. And so if we are in the image and likeness of that God who is truth itself, then to deliberately misrepresent the truth is really, in a sense, to deface the image of God. It is an offense against God, an offense against the truth, and on a very basic level, a kind of infidelity to God, who is truth and faithfulness themselves. So as Christians, we should consider that we have a special obligation to the truth because we claim to come in the name of He who is truth. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now, the Old Testament teaches us that God himself is the source of all truth. His word is truth. His law is truth. And as it says in Psalm 119, his faithfulness endures to all generations. And what is faithfulness? Faithfulness is just fidelity to one's word. We've talked about this before in our programs on faith. When you have faith in someone, if I have faith in my dad, that means I believe his word. When he says something, I can trust him. So since God himself is truth, God's people are called to live in truth. Now, the entirety of God's truth has been made manifest, of course, in the person of Jesus Christ, who is said to be full of grace and truth. He is the truth, the way, the truth, and the light. And Jesus says of himself, whoever believes in me may not remain in darkness. That darkness is the darkness of ignorance of the truth. When we come into Christ, we are in the light of the truth. To follow Jesus is to live in the spirit of truth, the spirit that God sends in his name to lead us into all the truth. So, truth is very integral to the gospel, to the Christian life. And if we look at our own human nature, we have a certain inclination towards the truth. Aristotle once, in the beginning of his classic philosophical work, The Metaphysics, he defines human beings in this way. He says, men by nature desire to know. That is, to be human is to seek to know the truth about the world. That's why we are called Homo sapiens. Sapiens is a Latin word for knowing, the knowing or the thinking man. What are we knowing? What are we thinking about? We're trying to find out the truth. We're trying to understand the truth about the world, whether that's philosophical truth, scientific truth, moral truth. Everybody is seeking to uncover truth in one way or another. So everybody wants to know the truth, and everybody is irritated at people who are untruthful. Have you ever thought about this? There's many sins that a person will forgive and just get over, right? Like let's say you're talking to your friend and you get in a fight and your friend calls you a name. Like she just says, you're an arrogant jerk, right? Now let's say later your friend comes back and says, I'm really sorry, I lost my temper, and will you forgive what I said? Most of us will say, sure, we can understand that. But let's say your friend deliberately lies to you. Let's say you find out that your friend has been lying behind your back for weeks or months about something. And then they just say, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have lied. Will you forgive me? Well, maybe you will forgive them. I hope you will. But will you ever trust them again, right? Can you trust someone after they've habitually lied? That's much more difficult. It's much more difficult to rebuild trust once it's been broken. And I think lying is a specific sort of sin that really strikes at our nature in a certain way. When we catch people in lying, it's offensive on a very raw, natural level, different than other sins. We have a harder time overlooking it because we have a natural inclination towards the truth. And when we do have this uprightness in our actions and our speech, that's said to be truthfulness or sincerity or candor. Just saying what saying the truth, saying what you think. Truth or truthfulness is a virtue that consists in showing ourselves true in deeds and truthful in words. And so if we are truthful people, then what this means is we are on guard against duplicity. Duplicity is when you're kind of saying one thing but plotting to do another thing, kind of double-minded. Dissimulation, that's when you're trying to obscure the truth. You're trying to muddy the waters so people can't see the truth. I'm thinking of Bill Clinton's famous testimony during the impeachment, where he was trying to practice dissimulation to cover up his extramarital affair, right? Or hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is saying one thing and then doing something different, saying, "Hey, you shouldn't steal," and then robbing somebody yourself. Now, why do human beings have such a commitment to the truth. Why do we value truth so highly? Well, on a very practical level, we simply couldn't live in civil society if there wasn't mutual confidence that we were being truthful with one another, right? How could we even have a society if we were all habitually lying? If somebody said, yeah, I'll be there to pick you up at 4 o'clock. Ha, psych, I'm not actually going to be there. Yeah, that'll be $100. Not, it's actually 300, right? Yes, I love you. Actually, I don't. How could we even have, I mean, imagine all the sporting events if the referees were all untruthful, if teachers were habitually untruthful, if spouses and children and friends were all untruthful. We could not even have civil society, and that's why we are so angry when people lie to us, because truth is absolutely necessary. It's a fundamental glue that holds our society together. It keeps, in a sense, it keeps a just balance between what ought to be expressed and what ought to be kept. It's kind of a balance between honesty and discretion, right? Now, and what I mean by that is, just because I say we have to be truthful, that doesn't mean we have to reveal. That doesn't mean that everybody has the right to all knowledge, right? Like, well, I got to be truthful. I'm gonna give out my credit card number on the air, right? My obligation to live and speak the truth doesn't extend to divulging all sorts of information that people have no right to. So there's a balance. There's a balance between the things we ought to say, and that when we say those things, we need to make sure that we're being truthful in them. So if we are disciples of Christ, we are consenting to live in the truth. And it's a certain kind of simplicity of life that's in conformity with the example that Jesus Christ himself gives us. And we are taught this in the New Testament. In the letter of 1 John chapter 1, verse 6, it says, if we say we have fellowship with him while we walk in darkness, we lie and do not live according to the truth. Okay, so we have to we have to always bear witness to the truth, speak the truth. There's a few things to consider when it comes to the truth of Jesus Christ himself, right? Christ proclaims before Pontius Pilate that he has come into the world to bear witness to the truth. And Pontius Pilate skeptically, cynically, nihilistically asks, what is truth, right? Like Jesus talking about truth, and he's so jaded. He's, what is the truth, right? The truth is a person. It's Christ. The truth that God sent his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe in him would not perish, but have eternal life, as the Gospel of John says. Now, if we affirm that, then we must take part in the life of the church in being a witness to that truth of the gospel. And claiming to be a Christian, claiming to be a follower of this gospel, brings with it certain obligations of our own witness to the transmission of the faith in our words and in our deeds. So, the Catechism says, this is in paragraph 2472, quote, all Christians, by the example of their lives and the witness of their word, wherever they live, have an obligation to manifest the new man which they have put on in baptism, and to reveal the power of the Holy Spirit by whom they were strengthened at confirmation. That is just a fancy way of saying, if you are a Christian, you ought to act like it. You ought to bear the fruit that a Christian ought to bear. Or as there is a saying, don't let the first time people realize you are a Catholic be when they get invited to your funeral mass. Like, oh, a mass, I didn't realize he was Catholic, right? We should manifest the truth of the faith in our lives. Now, the supreme witness to truth historically is martyrdom, right? A martyr is one who bears witness to the truth with his or her own blood. That is, they are most perfectly conformed to the image of Christ, who is truth, because like Christ, they are killed for the truth. They bear witness to the truth of the faith and Christian doctrine. There's a famous story, St. Ignatius of Antioch. He was a early second century bishop, one of the disciples of St. Peter, who was condemned to death to be thrown to the arena in Rome and eaten by wild animals. And he said, quote, let me become the food of the beasts through whom it will be given me to reach God. That's his epistle to the Romans. He viewed, and the church traditionally viewed, this act of martyrdom as a supreme witness to the truth, one that that in a sense ensured one's place among the blessed. To die for the sake of Christ is to be supremely conformed to Christ and to be guaranteed a place among the blessed in heaven. That's why martyrs can be. That's why martyrs are often canonized, because the act of giving one's life for the faith is itself a saintly act. Now, in contemporary usage, martyr or martyrdom is often, these words are often used to simply refer to anyone who dies for a cause. And like if someone dies in the cause of something, they'll say he is a martyr to his cause. This is actually an incorrect use of the word. A martyr is not simply someone who dies for a cause, although that's the popular usage. A martyr is someone who dies for the truth. So, for example, you have this famous saint from the 7th century, Saint Lambert of Maastricht, which is a Dutch city now, but at the time it was in the Frankish kingdom. And Lambert was a bishop who was reproving his lord, Pepin of Herstal, for taking a mistress and living in flagrant public adultery. And Lambert chastised Pepin and said this is not fit for a Christian ruler to be living in open adultery, and he condemned the Lord's sins until the Lord and his mistress conspired to have Lambert killed. And while Lambert was praying at a chapel, some Frankish soldiers came in and speared him through the heart with a javelin, which is how he's depicted in iconography. Now, a question though, did Saint Lambert die for the gospel? Is he a martyr? Well, he didn't die for the gospel in the sense that someone said, deny Christ or I will kill you, but he did die for the truth. He died for the truth of the sanctity of marriage and the church's moral teaching, and for that reason, he is considered a martyr. He's considered a martyr to the sanctity of marriage. So martyrdom is when you die on behalf of or in the service to the truth. It's not simply when you're dying for a cause. So strictly speaking, people who die for the wrong cause cannot be considered martyrs. You can't speak of martyrs to the communist cause had its martyrs, or the martyrs of the Nazi cause. Even though those people might have wanted to think of their own fallen in that way, it's an inappropriate use of the term. A martyr is one who gives his life up or her life for the truth. Now, that being said, there's many offenses against the truth, like false witness, or perjury. False witness is when you simply make a statement publicly that is contrary to the truth, and when you make it under oath, it becomes perjury, which is a more serious offense, because when you make it under oath, you have invoked the name of God. Think about if you're in court, you've raised your hand and you've said, "So help me God." So now, if you lie under oath, that's a more serious sin because you've invoked God's name. Another way we can sin against the truth is by failing to respect a person's reputation. People have a right to a good reputation if they've not ruined it by their own deeds already. But you sin against the truth when you go out of your way to cause unjust injury to a person's reputation. And there's various ways you can do this by rash judgment. Rash judgment is when you assume without sufficient foundation the fault of someone else. Like if you hear something about someone and you don't have any evidence one way or another, but you just believe it because you're inclined to believe the worst about somebody. This happens so much in the public. I think we don't even are aware of it oftentimes. Think about when you hear a scandalous story. You hear an accusation against, let's say a priest or someone in power, and you don't know any of the evidence, but you just go, I believe it. That's a rash judgment. So the prudent thing to do for a truthful person is to say, well, I'm withholding my judgment until more evidence comes out. If only we did more of that in society. Now, detraction is another sin against the truth. Detraction happens when you disclose another's faults and failings to people who didn't know about them and don't need to know about them. So oftentimes we know the faults of those who are closest to us. Like, let's say someone in your household, they have a certain fault that only those who live in that household would know, only people close to them. either a moral failing or some problem. They struggle with something, and then you go out and you start blabbing about it to people who have no reason to know that. That's detraction. You're taking another's private weaknesses and you're displaying it abroad. That is an attack on someone's reputation and an offense against the truth as well. Then there's also something called calumny, and calumny is when we simply lie about we lie about someone. We spread false rumors about them for the purpose of hurting their reputation. So, because we want to avoid rash judgment and detraction and calumny and all these things, we should always be careful to interpret people's thoughts, words, and actions in a favorable way. So often you will see somebody do something and you're not sure why they did it. It looks bad. The optics on it are very bad, and you're not sure why they did it. The Catholic thing to do is to give those actions the most charitable interpretation as possible. That is, you look at every range of possibility for what could have motivated them to do such a thing, and you think of what is the most charitable towards that person, and you say, perhaps it was that, right? Perhaps it was that. You give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, I'm not saying you blindly close your eyes and ignore the truth. Maybe there is no positive explanation for something. So let's say this: you're going to work and your coworker comes in and he's just super snippy and he's angry and he's making your day miserable and he's being mean to you. What is the explanation for this? On the one hand, we could say Bob is simply a jerk. He's an awful human being and he's got a bad character. Or we could say a more charitable explanation: Bob must be having a bad day. Maybe he didn't sleep well last night. Maybe something's going on in his life. I should pray for him, right? So you see, you look at his activity and you give Bob's activity the most charitable explanation that you can, as long as it's feasible. I mean, if Bob did get a good night's sleep and nothing's going on in his life and he is just a jerk, then sometimes there's no further coat of polish you can put on it, so to speak. But the point is, as long as we have a reasonable wiggle room to give somebody the benefit of the doubt, we ought to. Now, not only these sorts of things are against truth, but also things like flattery or adulation, where you're like, "Oh, you are the smartest. You are the most brilliant leader." When you're flattering someone in hopes of getting some sort of reward from them. That is also an offense against the truth, because flattery is kind of like an insincere praise. It doesn't proceed from an authentic valuation of a person's worth or the worth of their deeds. You're just kind of praising them in hopes of winning them over to your side or getting something from them. Also, boasting or bragging, right? Boasting or bragging, that is exaggerating one's own successes or virtues for the sake of getting people to think more highly of you. It says also in the Catechism, and this is interesting, in 2481, it says irony or sarcasm aimed at disparaging someone by maliciously caricaturing some aspect of their behavior. So, when you have a caricature or a sarcastic depiction of someone, you're taking one aspect of their character and you're kind of blowing it out of proportion to where that becomes the defining characteristic of the person. It's really a dehumanization of the person, because it reduces them to a single trait or a single trait or aspect, and that is untruthful as well. Now, lying is bad, but does it matter what we're lying about? Is a white lie worse or just as bad as like lying about something serious? The gravity of a lie that you tell, it is related to the nature of the truth it's deforming, the circumstances, the intentions of the one who is lying, and the harm it is the harm that it causes its victims. So sometimes you have these things where somebody says, "How much do you weigh?" And we say 180 pounds when you know you weigh 190. Like, is that as serious as falsely accusing someone of murder? No, it's not, because in the latter case, falsely accusing someone of murder, you have a evil intention. There's grave harm that could come to the person who is falsely accused. It's a very serious, grave matter that is about murder. So it's much more serious than something like lying about your weight or something like that. Not to say it's not still wrong. It's still a venial sin to tell little white lies, but not all lies are of the same gravity. And we should point this out. Not every untruth is actually a lie. There's an interesting section. I wish I could remember where it is, but in Thomas Aquinas, he talks about so-called jocose lies, and jocosity is an old Latin word for humor. Okay, a jocose lie is when you deceive someone for the purpose of playing a joke on them or doing something that they will delight in. For example, we've probably done this before where we fabricate a cover story to get someone into a certain place at a certain time so all their friends can jump out and say surprise at their birthday party, right? You make up some pretense to get the person into the place. Is that a lie? Do I have to go to confession for scheduling a surprise birthday party? Well, that depends on how successful the party is, I guess. But no, Thomas says that's an example of a jocose lie, and it's not even really a lie because even though it involves a deception, the deception is just a temporary ruse to get someone into a situation where you have a greater revelation of the truth, so to speak. You're not intending to keep something from them. You're intending to lead them into a situation where you can bring the whole matter into light, and where it actually is very pleasurable and delightful, and where the person laughs. They don't say, you planned a surprise party, I'll never trust you again, right? We know that trust hasn't been violated in these situations. They say, you are so clever, you got me, I didn't see that coming. We take a certain joy in being the victims of these sorts of ruses. So it's just an interesting distinction, a jocular or humorous ruse in which trust isn't violated versus a lie or falsehood when trust is violated. So you see, there's so many ways we can parse this. It's very fascinating. We didn't get to the interesting age-old question of, if it's World War II and the Nazis come to your door asking if you're hiding Jews, is it just to lie to them or not? We'll have to save that one for another time. But there's so much we can unpack here with the commandments, and I hope it's been helpful for you. But until next time, this has been Faith Matters. May the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord let his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord look kindly upon you and give you peace. God bless.